I will switch into English to greet our speaker. Thank you so much, Jack, for being here. Thank you so much for joining us from from country far away. If I'm not mistaken, you are in Brussels, in Belgium, in Brussels. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for all the work that you are doing. Thank you for agreeing to share what you are doing with us, with our audience. As I already mentioned, this is a third event out of a series of events, of 3 events that we decided to organize dedicated to Zero Waste Cities program. So 2 days ago, we presented the instrument that we developed dedicated to Zero Waste Cities. Yesterday, we presented Lubotin's case on how they are implementing the program in Ukraine. And now we are very happy to host you, and we are very eager to hear from you about the international experience, about the program overall, and anything that you would like to share with us. So Jack, if you don't mind, you can share your presentation. And everybody welcome Jack McKibben, Head of Local Zero Waste Implementation of Zero Waste Europe. Happy to host you, happy to have you. Friends, if you have any questions for Jack, please send them in chat in Ukrainian, or if you want, in English. No problem, we will translate them for Jack. So please be active and use an opportunity to communicate with Jack and ask any questions that you have. Jack, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It is an absolute pleasure to be part of this series, to support the work of the Alliance in Ukraine, and to play a very, very small part in any way we can in helping the recovery during these horrible times. So I send warmest of wishes from the not so warmest of places in Brussels, in Belgium, but I am from the UK originally. And yes, I am the head of local zero waste implementation. My email is jack@zerowasteeurope.eu. That is just a mistake on the opening slide. I promise things will get better from here. But I'm going to talk about our zero waste cities at Zero Waste Europe across the continent. You heard from one Louboutin yesterday. We have 480 others in Europe. So to speak a bit about what it is to be a zero waste city, where they are, some of the impact that they're having, and some of the main policies behind this movement, and to answer any questions that you might have following my presentation. So I will get started. Voila. Firstly, who we are. Zero Waste Europe is an NGO, a not-for-profit association based in Brussels, in Belgium. But we have member organizations. We have 31 member organizations now in 27 European countries, including, for example, the Zero Waste Alliance Ukraine. But they range from members in Cyprus, in Latvia, in Portugal, the UK, yeah, right across Europe in a different range of contexts. And being based in Brussels, as we are, we use this to advocate for ambitious European Union policies, obviously in the fields of waste and circular economy. So that's a top-down approach to change legislation. But then what is most important for today is that we also use a bottom-up approach. So we mentor and support cities or municipalities, that we also call them, towards a zero waste transition. And this is done predominantly via our network of members. So as you know, if you joined yesterday, the Zero Waste Alliance Ukraine is the main driving force behind the support for Louboutin and Lviv. They know the context, the language, obviously far, far better than we do from Brussels. So our role is to help support our members, build capacity, raise awareness of best practices, and model the front runners so that we can say, hey, zero waste cities isn't just a sort of a a vision for the future. It's actually a very concrete, detailed set of policies that can be implemented today in a range of different contexts that is proven to deliver results. So you may already have done this in previous series, but I think it's important just to mention this. How do we define zero waste? And I've highlighted in red here the important, because a zero waste city is one that commits not to increase the amount of waste or the capacity, so the amount of waste it can take in for incineration or landfill or other technologies that we deem as unacceptable, such as waste to energy incineration or the gasification, pyrolysis, different means whereby you do not have a circular economy. Basically, you're taking waste, residual waste, and making fuels or energy from that. But therefore, the process requires a lot of energy. It's a very carbon intensive process. So that for us is unacceptable within a zero waste city. We work with municipalities who commit to phasing out and reducing this amount of waste year upon year. But of course, there's much, much more within the hierarchy. This is just one small part. So we support municipalities to look what they can do directly. So in this medium bit of the chart, which is in their direct sphere of control. For example, local authorities can decide how they recycle, what materials they recycle, and how they sort of treat the leftover residual waste. Increasingly, we are going further up the hierarchy to support municipalities to think, okay, what can they do within the wider system of a city, with businesses, with public institutions, to focus on reuse, prevention of materials, and ultimately to change our consumption patterns, which is what we need to transition to a circular economy. This slide I just wanted to include because it's just to showcase traditional waste management in the past has been very centralized. And what I mean by this is there's normally a decision from a regional authority or one big plant in the region that handles all of the waste, whereas zero waste decentralizes policies. It gives communities a better say and more decision-making powers over how the system is set up, and it creates more jobs. If you're focusing more on redesigning, remanufacturing, repairing, reusing products, they all require humans, at the moment, at least, to do these jobs. Whereas traditional waste management is far less human intensive because you just send the vast amount of waste for mechanical recycling or landfill or incineration. One of the key things to highlight about zero waste is that it visualizes the problem. It helps communities identify what is left in their non-recyclable waste. When you empower your community to sort of conduct an analysis to say, okay, we're implementing a system, but yet still there is paper, there's plastic, there's food constantly found in our non-recycled bin and therefore not being reused or recycled. You can therefore adapt effective policies to change that and address the problem directly. That's really important to highlight. So the Zero Waste Cities program itself, this is one part of the work that I and what we do at Zero Waste Europe and within our local implementation team, and it's existed since the first Zero Waste City in 2007, which was in Campano in Italy. We do not work with any municipality at the moment that generates 0 kilograms of waste yet. We are working towards that. So what our approach is with cities and communities is this continuous effort year upon year to phase out waste. We work with some of Europe's best practices, the top performing systems, but we also work with municipalities at the very bottom who are just starting out on their journey. And what is the key principle, the philosophy that unites all of our zero waste cities is the agreement to keep on improving, to work towards creating and implement systems that do not generate waste, but that goal being the long-term vision. But year upon year, you can continuously work to reduce total consumption of materials. You can reduce the non-recycled volume of materials, and you can increase collecting and recycling materials, composting, prevention, lots and lots of different policies that we can get into. But it's the progress year upon year. We're not sort of expecting massive change overnight with our cities. And so as a context for what we do, as I mentioned earlier, we have over 480 municipalities now in 15 European countries who've committed to become a zero waste city. This includes municipalities in the west of Europe, in Portugal, to the east of Europe, in Ukraine, in Cyprus, in Latvia, and lots in the center, in Italy, Croatia, Romania, and Spain. As I mentioned, this is done via our network of local and national coordinators who are becoming the go-to players for what zero waste is for municipalities at the local level. We create reports and case studies to help model best practices, as I mentioned, to showcase how zero waste can be done effectively, to learn from the challenges and also the successes. It's really important as well. And then in 2021, in March, we launched the world's first Zero Waste City certification, hosted by our sister organization, the Mission Zero Academy. The criteria is part of the platform that the Zero Waste Alliance Ukraine have created and published very recently. And we call this a to-do list for municipalities. A lot of the questions we get from cities is like, say, great, we agree with the general principle of zero waste cities, but what does it mean practically? How do you start this? So therefore, with the certification, we have a concrete list of policies and actions, and that can sort of rank on performance too, to say, okay, you want to be zero waste, you want to improve your system, you can follow these criteria, and we guarantee, seeing the evidence that we've gathered over the last 15 years, that this is proven to deliver results. So some of the impact of what it is to be a zero waste city. This analysis we did back in 2022, looking at data from the year before and from our then 460 municipalities. And we saw that the average separate collection rate was 67%. So collection rate is out of all of the waste that is generated being 100%, 67 on average was that is separately collected, which is then for reuse and recycling. And as I mentioned, this is important because it includes some of Europe's best performers, 93%, and some just starting on the journey, separately collecting 7%. But what's important is that the average total, and MSW here means municipal solid waste. So it's all of the waste that's generated from households and businesses. We don't focus like the EU on construction waste just yet. That is a future goal, but we're looking at households and businesses here. And the average total compared to in the EU in 2020 was 505 kilograms per year per person, but the average for our zero waste cities was 342 per person in 2020. So 160 kilograms less. So a really important sort of indicator of the impact that our model has. And this is a snapshot. It's a little outdated now, actually. We have an island in Greece recently committed. But you'll see here, these are where we can find our zero waste cities. And interestingly, you'll see Italy hosts a lot, and Slovenia, which will have a second speaker after me to speak about what has worked so well there. And I'll speak later in the presentation about Italy and why we have so many successful stories there. These are just some examples of the work that we do. We got case studies here on the right about the best practices reports. We have the State of Zero Waste Municipalities report, which is the biggest comprehensive overview of all of the work that happens in Europe and also now globally too. There are zero waste cities in 60 or so in Asia, a couple in Africa too, so it's an emerging global topic. And we also run workshops and host sessions and webinars to help co-design strategies with municipalities and help really get them to understand how this can be applied in their context. As I mentioned, 2020, yes.
No rush, please, no rush.
Speak slower, yes. Thank you, Sophia. Our sister organization, the Mission Zero Academy, we created to help be the professional hub of all of our work with cities and businesses. So we host data-driven activities and tools whereby municipalities can input data into the online digital tool, and it can provide them with calculations on greenhouse gas emission savings or predictions on waste prevention measures as well, and the impact these will have. We also host a lot of learning activities from municipalities and businesses, and likewise with the certifications for, again, cities and businesses as well. This is some of the criteria. I think I will move on because this is all part of the platform that the Alliance has published. But you'll see here, what is important about our certification is that there's a minimum threshold for success. If we see a baseline sort of level of action that all municipalities must be achieving to become 1 star, so the very minimum of a zero waste city. And then, depending on the performance and the impact of the city strategy, they are given points after an audit, and the number of points leads to the level of certification that they receive. The best obviously being 5 stars, and the sort of the minimum level being 1 star. So it's a criteria system based on mandatory goals, but also points-based goals to help sort of separate what is good practice and what is excellence within municipalities. One thing I wanted to really highlight is a cornerstone, a really key central part of a zero waste city strategy, and that is door-to-door collection. And what I mean by this is where you separate materials from your household or from your apartment building, and these are collected directly there. So from the side of the curb. It is the core foundation of what it is to be zero waste, because it has 2 big positive impacts. First of all, you can dramatically increase the amount of materials for recycling, or in the case of bio-waste, for composting. And secondly, you can really therefore reduce the amount of waste that is sent for landfill or incineration. That's the core argument. So you have a big impact on volumes in a very short space of time. And we see with door-to-door collection, so you see here, this is from the region of Catalonia in Spain. There is an interesting case study here because within one region, there are 3 different systems. So you have on the left here side, these are road containers. So big bins that are put on the street where anyone can bring and leave their rubbish. The blue is door to door. As I mentioned, this system of putting your rubbish outside on the street, outside of your house, for collection by the waste agency or a private agency. So partially, the blue is partially implemented. So for some materials, sometimes they collect paper, but not bio-waste. Sometimes they will collect packaging, but not paper. And the green is door-to-door total for these 5 waste streams. And you'll see here, the greens, therefore, in terms of higher kilograms of collection for bio-waste, for paper, for glass, interesting, slightly less. And then for packaging, it's more, and dramatically, the volume of non-recycled residual waste is far, far lower than the other 2 systems. And specifically, looking at bio-waste, so this is predominantly food waste and garden waste. So from the kitchen and from the garden. And what we mean here in English is impurities. Basically, it is the non-organic materials found in bio-waste. It could be the plastic packaging that your food comes in. It could be the paper of a box with food in. Lots of different materials that cannot be composted. And door-to-door, again, delivers far lower impurities, which means the organic materials can be composted to a higher quality than road containers. And this is really important to highlight because very often, unfortunately, municipalities will go for the cheaper, quick option, which is to put a big container on the street and say, look, we are compliant with our national or European regulations, but these are the lowest performing systems. So it's really, really important to highlight this as the foundation for Zero Waste City. Some of the benefits to include here, Environmentally, economically, and socially, we see a lot of the benefits. Obviously, if less waste is being generated for landfill or incineration, often municipalities can save money by having to pay less to dispose of that waste at the landfill or at the incinerator. Also, if there is less litter on the street, the municipality can save money because they need less resources to clean and pick up that litter. And therefore, the system is much more optimized because you have higher qualities of recycling, and of that material, it is much more likely to be sold on and used for recycling because there's less food waste if you have an effective sort of collection system for that in particular. For example, if you collect the bio-waste well from kitchens and from households, there's less scraps, less materials found in the paper, in the packaging bin, and therefore these can be cleaned very easily and prepared for recycling. This can lead to therefore the system being more optimized and cheaper for citizens and for obviously the public authorities. But what we see is when you look at the social aspect and the cultural aspect, focusing on zero waste brings new jobs in sustainable areas for repair and reuse and remanufacturing. It brings centers of community engagement, community compost sites, or repair cafes, reuse centers, and you can really help create local jobs and use local expertise. For example, previously people who've worked in the fields of electricians or manufacturing, they have a role to help repair and to train, help repair materials and to train others, perhaps younger individuals in the community, to take on this role in the future. So I think I have maybe 7 minutes or so left. I don't know. I'm looking at you, Sophia. Great. So some examples. This is all well and good, maybe that the principle is there, but some examples from across Europe, and maybe it's less time, Sophia, so I will be quick. Italy, as you can see here, lots of zero waste cities. This is from 2018, but the data has actually increased since then, so we need to update the slide. But you will see out of, so there are sort of 48 provinces, so large areas, out of 107 across all of Italy. So nearly half, above 65% separate collection, which on average, if you separately collect 65%, you're looking at a recycling rate on average of 55%. We would say there is 10% of a loss. And this is because, as I mentioned, the material isn't enough quality to be recycled. It's too contaminated with food waste, for example. That's on average 10%. So, but we focus on separate collection rates because that's in the direct control of a municipality. Recycling companies have the true recycling figures, but often this is hard to come by because, for example, paper could sit in a recycling yard for a year, 2 years, so the accurate figures are slower to come by. So we focus on separate collection, just to clarify that. In Italy, the top 4 provinces all recycle above 80%. And in one of the zero waste champion areas, Treviso, which is around here, they have the region has a 1 million population. They separately collect nearly 90% of all of the waste, municipal waste that's generated. And in terms of the municipalities level, 122 are above 90%. So those who are the best performing zero waste cities are separately collecting 90%. And as a result, you have 39 municipalities, the best of the very best, who generate less than 30 kilograms per person per year of waste that is sent for landfill or incineration. So yeah, I think 30 kilograms, we did some research on this, is a sort of a 7-8-year-old's equivalent. I don't know, but you can visualize this in many other ways. 353 municipalities generate less than 50 kilograms, and over 2,000 municipalities in Italy who follow the general principles of a zero city. There are 300 now in our network in Italy who are zero city, but 2,000 more who sort of have some of the policies they generate less than 100 kilograms per person per year. So it's proven to deliver results in a diverse range of contexts, because you have densely populated areas and cities with very rural, small areas. You have touristic parts on Sardinia as well. So yeah, it's a real good case study to showcase how zero waste can be effectively implemented in a range of contexts. In one example from the Contarina region, Treviso, this just shows you the impact of the recycling rate, nearly 90%, compare that to the average in Italy of 63%. And of course, this has a huge positive impact. So across the 49 municipalities that the Contarina Waste Management Company is responsible for, 42 kilograms of residual waste per year is generated. Compare that to the average of 181 in Italy. As I mentioned, this is huge economic savings. So in Contarina, for the average family household, they paid 198 euros per year. Compare this to the average in the 3 main regions, you get high performing systems with low costs. This is the central point of a zero waste strategy, because the system is optimized, the citizens are educated, made aware of the policies, and therefore they are well engaged. It's a win-win situation for the environment and for the municipality's budget. Now, I have some slides about Slovenia, but for time, and I will move on because our next speaker, I believe, is from Slovenia, knows this information much more than I can. I do, but they are a zero waste champion, one of the highest recyclers in the EU. And Ljubljana was the first zero waste capital city in Europe. And some of the figures here, you'll see again the correlation between low residual waste, high collection of materials, with bio-waste being the most important. And these are some of the figures of the quantity of this. I can share my slides with the Zero Waste Alliance Ukraine team if they will be useful, so you can have more time to go into the detail here. But they just back up the points that I have made. One final addition. This is from Pontevedra, is an area in Spain. I've focused a lot on composting, and this is a best practice for decentralized community composting. It's a very cheap and a socially positive way of dealing with the food and garden waste. So they started from scratch with a new pilot system for bringing community composting together to the region. And this means having one compost area for maybe 50 to 60 households. They each bring their waste to the area, and they were trained on how to compost well, and how to maintain this month after month. And again, there's a huge positive impact because composting brings natural fertilizer and health to local soils. It's far better for the environment because you don't have to take organic waste to maybe a central composting plant, or of course, if all food waste and garden waste sits in a landfill, it emits a lot of methane as well. But it's also economically very successful. And so the figures from Pontevedra shows that the average fee for incinerating, for burning waste, is 235 euros per ton of waste, whereas the community compost was 110 euros per ton. So if your municipality generates hundreds of thousands of tons per year, you can see you're already saving 120 euros per ton. You can do the maths. That's a quite nice saving to be made. I think that's the end of my slides. I have, more time to answer questions, of course. I thank you again for the opportunity to present. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here with you all. Thank you for the translators. I hope I didn't speak too fast. And yes, best of luck with the rest of today's session, and of course, your continued work in this area. For more information, you can check out the Zero Waste Cities website here, or please feel free to email me at this email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jack. It was very, very useful. And if you don't mind, we would be happy to share your presentation with the participants. So, dear friends, you will be able to take a look at the numbers. And thank you so much for this data-driven approach. I am afraid that we are lacking it sometimes. And I think that this brings us a very strong message that before we implement any sort of solution, we need to have data to see what would be this best solution. So thank you, Jack, to showing us this clear data and how it actually changes.
One thing, Sophia, that's a really good point, if I may, sorry, that I
Yeah.
didn't mention. Many members of the Zero Waste Alliance Ukraine have already done this, but a residual waste assessment is a really good way to get that data to create the starting point. If you know the quantities of waste and the composition of waste generated within a certain area or a general coverage of your municipality, that's really useful data to say, okay, what's our biggest problem? What policies can be introduced to change this? And where should we prioritize? And I think the Alliance in Ukraine has done this extremely well. And it's a really important first step, because then you have that data and you have the baseline sort of starting point to measure all future progress against as well. So I just wanted to highlight that, so I didn't mention it in my presentation, sorry.
All good. Thank you very much, Jack. Dear friends, you are able, you have an opportunity to ask your questions because I have questions and I use my opportunity and I will ask at least 2 questions. But please, if you have any questions, don't be shy. Ask them in chat and we will translate them to Jack. Or if you want to ask them in English, please go ahead and do so. Jack, if you don't mind, I have 2 questions, 2 separate questions, and I will tell them both. The first one would be the timelines of the implementation of these solutions, because I find that we sometimes are very impatient and we choose wrong solutions because we want the outcomes. We want to see outcomes very quickly, so we choose sort of the easy way. We think it's the easy way because we want to see the solution tomorrow. And this brings me to the second part of the question, or second question, the incineration. I find it sometimes a common narrative that we have in Ukraine, that incineration will solve the waste problem. So that's why we need to build as many incinerations as possible in Ukraine, and then we'll solve all the waste problem. And I think this is the reason. I think this is the easy solution we are looking for, but it's not. Your presentation already showed that it's not. Maybe you can tell us what is the timeline of implementing zero waste solutions and why it is better if we look at it in long-term project, long-term strategy, and how cities that built incinerators long time ago are now struggling, or are they okay with incinerators? How are they doing with that? Thank you.
Oh, yes, good questions. The timeline, we want zero waste to be the long-term strategy because it's a continuous effort. You may recycle 99% or generate 30 kilograms of waste per person per year, but there's still 1% recycling or 30 kilograms to reduce. Wherever you are, there is room for improvement. So it's a long-term strategy towards optimization. But we would set municipalities within a zero waste strategy goals within the first 2 years, within the 5 years, and then a 10 to 15 sort of long-term vision of what they're working towards. So that might be getting, the long-term may be getting from 400 kilograms of waste per person in total generated to 200, to half that. But then the short-term goals may be some of these easier solutions that you mentioned. For example, you can change the collection system and have dramatic impact on the amount of waste or the amount of waste generated, sort of sent for incineration or landfill in a space of 2 or 3 months. Basically, if the system is implemented right with enough information, particularly if you start to collect bio-waste, that has a huge impact on taking waste out of the non-recycled bag. So yeah, we would really encourage short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals within a zero-waste strategy, but the specific policies within each of these timelines differ depending on the local context. And the strength and the impact of a zero-waste city strategy is based upon it being locally tailored. It has to fit the local context. Lviv's, Louboutins, many other cities in Ukraine, they'll each have slightly different strategies, and they'll have very different strategies to Spanish strategies or Dutch or Cypriot. So, for example, in one municipality, the priority may be plastic packaging. Single-use plastics during the summer months are the most problematic in my municipality, and therefore that's the priority. And over 2 years, you may want to introduce a ban on single-use plastic items in public spaces. You may want to introduce economic subsidies for businesses to adopt reusable options. And then in other municipalities, you may have 50% of the non-recycled waste being organics, and therefore that's the priority. So the specific policies will differ depending on the timelines and the context as well. So I hope that answers that. But we would, so we would say set goals for the short and medium term with a long-term vision, and then continuously review and evaluate these goals using this, as you said, a data-centric approach, knowing where you started and the progress that's been made year upon year. Incineration, your second question. It's viewed as the easy solution because you generate waste, no one has to change their policies, and then it's out of sight, out of mind if you burn it in a big machine. But just because it's out of sight doesn't mean that it's not having an impact. A huge amount of research and data that we have done and that other partners have done showcase the toxics that are released from incinerators, whether it's released in the air from the burning or from when you burn waste, you're still left with a huge amount of in English is the ashes, right? The slag, sometimes it's called. This is simply the toxics left over that haven't been emitted. They still need to be landfilled somewhere. So it's not a complete process, and you therefore have to deal with that. That gets into the soil. Toxics are in the air. Recent research that we did in places like Lithuania, called a biomonitoring process, showcased that it was actually very unsafe to eat eggs within the local community. So because they were infected or sort of contained far too many hazardous chemicals and toxics because of they were in a close proximity to the incinerator. So that's one thing, the environmental and the health benefits are completely wrong. But as you say, contracts for incinerators often last 20, 25 years. Therefore, we strongly advocate for municipalities now not to agree to this because the world is changing very quickly. Ukraine is looking at sort of European Union membership, which will hopefully come in the coming years. And that will require alignment with some key policies around environmental standards, on the volume of waste that's sent for incineration, the stabilization of waste, the fact that waste incineration has to be included in the European carbon emissions trading schemes. All of these are pointing in one direction, which is that it's no longer sustainable to fund and to operate waste incinerators because they create a lock-in effect for the continued need to generate waste year upon year. You need to feed the machine to produce energy, or to meet the contract, and they are bad for the environment, and there are far cheaper, more impactful solutions that are being implemented, simply put. So the evidence bank against incineration is growing year upon year, and it will continue. It's only pointing in the same direction. The EU, for example, is really restricting any of its funding to fund incinerator projects now. So there are fewer and fewer private funders who would ever sort of go down these long-term projects in the future. So I hope that's answered your question. A very long answer, sorry.
Thank you so much. I really, really wanted us to hear that from you, from your international mouth. I think we seem to listen to international people better than to our local people. Thank you, Tatiana, for this question. Jack, I will translate it, but I will ask if we don't mind not to answer it because it doesn't concern your topic, although if you have 30 seconds and you can, then please, whether the solar panels and solar batteries are environmentally friendly, because Tatiana heard that it's very difficult to utilize them. And apologies that it's not very much on the topic.
No, gosh, this topic needs more than 30 seconds to answer. Unfortunately, yes and no, Tatiana. Yes, they are obviously more environmentally friendly because it's renewable energy, particularly with climate change. There's going to be warmer, sunnier days. So that is fantastic because you reduce the need for fossil fuel energy, and they can be practically applied at small scale on top of households, for example, or on large scale solar plants. But what your question is getting to is towards the end of their life. So solar panels at the moment, I think they sort of have a lifespan between 10, 15 years on average. The materials used to make solar panels at the moment are not recyclable, and they require sort of what in English you would call critical raw materials, rare earths, materials like lithium, which we have limited resource on the planet for. They often exist only in certain countries. So there's a wider geopolitical angle to this. If you're looking at energy and resource independence, which is now a very central part of our thinking. And the recycling, the reusing of these materials is very hard to do, if not impossible at the moment. And therefore you either burn them and you emit, as I mentioned, the toxic chemicals, or you landfill them and you risk sort of the pollution to the local land because, there's a lot of high risk as well with these batteries and materials behind panels, sort of self-combusting, creating sort of fires. There's lots of examples of this increasingly happening. So yes and no to your answer, but what we need is to establish more reusable, ideally, solar panels, are giving them a second, third, fourth life, or to create systems to better recycle the materials within the panels so that we're not switching one single-use problem for another.
Thank you very much, Jack. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all your work. Thank you for all the answers to our questions. Dear friends, dear participants, we will be letting Jack go. We are very, very thankful. Natalia, thank you for your question. We need to let Jack go and need to invite our second speaker to the panel. So if you don't mind, we will reply to your question online, in the written form. Jack, thank you again. And I will invite to speak Jaka. Thank you, Jack. Bye. Goodbye. Jaka, thank you very much for being here. Specifically, why? Because Jaka is actually on vacation. So Jaka agreed to join us being on vacation. Look at this beautiful vacating men. Thank you so much for joining us. We are in Ukraine, and Jaka is, I think you're in Slovenia.
Yep.
Yeah. Jaka is from Slovenia, and he's currently in Slovenia. So Jaka is a project lead of Ecologists Without Borders. And he is actually one of the people who knows the best what is happening with the Zero Waste Cities program in Slovenia. And as you have seen from Jack's presentation, that Slovenia is one of the most interesting examples, I would say this way. So we asked Jaka to share his experience with us, to tell us a little bit more about Zero Waste Cities program in Slovenia, how it has been doing in Slovenia, and anything that Jaka feels important to share with us. Please, Jaka, go ahead. Just one big favor, no rush. We have interpretation. So our interpreters will love you no matter what, but if you speak a bit slower, then they will love you truly. So Jaka, please go ahead. Friends, if you have questions, ask them in the chat and we will ask Jaka afterwards. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. If I'll have signal issues, just tell me and I'll close the camera, but so far it looks okay. Yes, I'm Jaka from Ekologi Brez Meja. Like it was mentioned, we are the national coordinator for the cities movement, Zero Waste Cities movement in Slovenia. But before we get to that, I would like to also answer the question that was posed before, just briefly. There are two things you have to keep in mind about solar panels, for example. They're designed to last for much more than 10 years. So, you know, even though they use critical raw materials, problematic materials that are hard to recycle, even though we do have already recycling plants for this stuff, because it has a longer lifetime than, let's say, compared to a mobile phone, which has the same material. The battery of the mobile phone has the same lithium as a car battery or some other battery, right? Because it's much more, let's say, long-term use. These effects, if you calculate it per time used, are much lower. So I wouldn't worry about this. There is a lot of fear mongering related to sustainable, let's say, energy production and even batteries. Of course, we would all like to close, I don't know, slave-run mines in, I don't know, central Congo or something. But this is not just a problem of electric cars or electric vehicles. We use them for so many different things. And there is a separate movement about sustainable sourcing of critical raw materials. The industry itself is working on it because we are asking these questions. So it's important that we maintain this pressure, but I would not say that, oh no, now I know a bit more about lithium or something, and it just prevents me from using solar panels or anything battery powered, because overall they are more sustainable, definitely. But yes, to go back on topic, the Slovenian network of municipalities started in 2014. We had several events already before talking about zero waste, and there were several municipalities interested in how to implement this at the at the city level, because we represented also the good case practices from Italy, where they have an even larger cities network. And Italy is our neighbor. So, you know, if you take examples from northern Italy, that's a few hours drive away. So it's quite, you know, they're Italians, they're not Slovenians, they are different, but they're not that different. So it's an easy parallel to make. So it started with 4 municipalities joining. Actually, 3 decided to join because they have the same waste manager. They're already doing very well in Slovenia, and they're like, okay, this fits our work perfect. This is the way to go. This is the right thing to do. This will be just an upgrade of what we're already doing. Let's do it. Let's be the pioneers, because we've always been the pioneers. They started separate collection in the 90s, for example. Not many municipalities in Slovenia did that. And then Ljubljana, our capital city, heard about it as well. And they forced us to accept all 4 of them as the first municipality. They just wanted to be among the first. literally, because it was important for them, because they were applying for the Green Capital of Europe award as well. And this was, something that could give them extra points, extra chances to win. And they did win in the end in 2016. And waste management, or resource management more broadly, was highlighted as something that they showcased really well. So it did help in the end. The network grew slowly from there. It was never a case that we would be pestering municipalities. We have about 20 right now, some in the process of joining, out of 220, 210 in Slovenia, 212. So some are big, some are small, some are tiny, like each village almost sometimes has a municipality. But our small network already covers about a fourth of the population of Slovenia, because we have the first and the third largest cities, and that means it has quite a big share. And even because only Ljubljana is in the network, but actually their waste management manages waste for, I don't know, 15 other municipalities. In effect, the policies have wider reaching effects than that. But as I was saying, we are not pestering municipalities to join, because we're quite pragmatic. We don't have time, we don't have energy, we don't have resources to just pester anyone. And we might convince someone, oh yeah, let's do this, let's write a strategy together, let's drive this process through, let's go maybe for international certification, which Jack surely showcased. If they don't really want it, right? Because it's easy to write something, it's easy to moderate workshops and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the zero waste strategy is for the municipality. It's for them to live, it's for them to lead, it's for them to embody and to drive on. We can help, of course, we gladly help, but we aren't always there. And this is something that's going on every day in our lives, right? This is, I'm not saying a new way of living or anything like that, but it's just a slightly adaptive way of thinking. So you can't always rely on crutches like our organization. So we basically always work with municipalities that approach us first, because they see, oh yeah, these guys are good, and the other guys in the network are good. Their value proposition, so to speak, is good. We want to do better. It's important. And then we start talking, because then, oh yeah, we have clearly someone who wants to improve on the other side. It will be much easier to do anything. And that's how basically through the years the network organically grew. And of course, my colleagues just joined, sorry. Of course, it has very small municipalities, some in the mountains. It has less than 1,000 people. And I was asked to talk about Bled in particular a bit more, which is a very famous place in Slovenia. It's also in the mountainous region, but quite populous. So it has maybe a few tens of thousands of people, of inhabitants, let's say. And the neighboring municipality also joined, because they share the waste manager. And they were one municipality initially. And you might say, okay, 50,000 or whatever, that's not that much. But actually, since it is one of the most famous places in Slovenia, it attracts a lot of tourists. So during the summer months, there are up to 10 times more people there than the inhabitants. And this causes great stress both to the local population and both to the waste manager itself, because you need all those extra trucks, all those extra people to manage everything. And for them, it was quite natural to try to do better, because also, Slovenia is covered with forests, it's covered with mountains. It's like this little zip file of different landscapes. So we do market ourselves as a green destination. And Bled is in the smack middle of the mountains, very beautiful area. So it's really important for them as well, because someone might call it like the green jewel of Slovenia or something like that. And they know that we can't just piggyback on our natural heritage forever. We have to try to be a bit proactive about preventing just greenwashing, because it's easy to have, the tourist board do some crazy we're so green or we're so zero waste publicity campaign for foreign visitors, but we want to show that we're also doing something well. So there was interest from the municipal side to join the network, and they were also the first internationally recognized by this MISA certification. We did a pilot with them, so they were pioneering several things with us. They joined because, again, they already feel they're doing well. It's clear that they can do better, of course, but they're like, okay, this is just maybe a next step for us. Yeah, maybe as an aside, because I don't know how much Jack explained, but in Slovenia, in general, mostly the more performant municipalities join our network, but we don't have this as a requirement per se. In Spain, municipalities with a few percent of separate collection join the network because they clearly see a path forward this way. And of course, it was similar in Croatia, and in such cases, when you start with almost no infrastructure or no awareness or no work being done, you can have really fast results in a couple of years. For example, in Croatia, they increased their separate collection amount by implementing door-to-door collection, I don't know, but like 40% in a year and a half or something. So crazy numbers. But Blade is at about 60% separate collection rate, for example, which is below the Slovenian average. So they clearly have room to improve, but the larger stressor are the tourists. So the strategy that we wrote together focuses a bit on this. So they also worked on how to improve the logistics of waste collection around the lake, how to enable the tourists to do it for them, for us, for all of us. They added more bins, removed the mixed waste bins. They worked a lot with the local providers. So both in the sense of housing. So if you think about hotels or bed and breakfasts, being, I don't know, other rooms, apartments, that sort of stuff. They have workshops for them, how to do the waste management better, how to communicate with the guests that they have to contribute. Even the trucks have multilingual signs on them that, this is zero waste municipality, you should help. We really try to, when a person comes there, to encourage them to participate in this zero waste experiment of sorts, because we can't do it without them, because there's just so many tourists, right? It's not like a marginal error that they will cause. They flood the place. So in a sense, the zero waste strategy is about a bit improving the current systems and then trying different little measures. And individually, each measure might seem like, oh, but this is nothing. But when you add everything together and combine this with powerful communication and persistent communication, and translation is needed, of course, because it's a touristic area, you can really get far. I always say that infrastructure can only get you so far. If people don't know that they should use it or how to use it or why to use it, it will never reach its full potential. And we were stuck without any funding at the national level for waste infrastructure for 7 years. And we improved our waste management significantly in that time, because we had to close a bunch of landfills. There was no infrastructure for incineration or new landfills. No money for that infrastructure. So we just had to work within the existing system. So it was more about soft measures, things like this: awareness raising, education, logistic optimization, etc., etc. And it worked great. So it might be very engineerial to just think, oh yeah, we'll build another plant, another landfill, another this, another that, and things will get solved. But if you forget about the soft measures, it will be just a bunch of money thrown away, even though it might be easier to think about, oh yeah, it's just a block of concrete that does stuff. Whether when you're talking about communication or awareness raising or long-term value chain, it's about working with people, and that we are nasty, so that's challenging. And if you're a mechanical engineer, you're not exactly trained to do that, right? So you can understand that there might be an appeal to just pay up and build a plant and you're done. But yes, what we try to do in our cities network is try to encourage this value change in the end. And for example, what Blade did, they now opened their own zero waste shop. They opened their own reuse center. So they're encouraging people to prolong the lifespan of products, of items. Now they're encouraging, of course, also packaging free shopping, all these communication stuff that I already mentioned. And there's also a very special hotel that we work with in that municipality that basically from when we started work to now, they managed to hold half the amount of waste that they generate per person, per guest. And also, I don't know, they separately collect over 90% of their waste. So it completely changed the hotel. They even got a higher level service now. They improved the quality, so they get another star as well. And they just live this thing. You know, you talk to the owners, to the directors, everyone knows about it. Because in the end, it's not the zero waste strategy, some document for the political figures or maybe for the waste manager or for some city planner. In a sense, it's for everyone. And sure, some things are really technical and you don't need to involve the local community, but some things is about working with schools or with the hotels, or I don't know, they pestered all the bars and restaurants to remove single-use items. They got really annoyed by the quantities of paper towel waste during Corona, I think. And they're like, okay, this is too much to deal with. We know paper is recyclable, but I think, and they just forced and replaced everyone to use hand dryers, for example, you know, rather use electricity than materials. So little bits here and there. Of course, they have lectures and workshops, and sometimes we collaborate on that. When it comes to funding, I mean, the municipality understand this is important and they use it. I don't think they have like a specific zero waste item on the, well, what thing, on the budget for the municipality or the waste manager, but it's mostly stuff that they do alongside of everything else they do. It's an upgrade of their current services and the way they work, right? So of course they would fund little bits here and there, stuff like that, but it's not like this was, oh shit, this is a major investment for the next 10 years and we need to starve a few years for that, anything like that. So it's quite a cheap approach in a sense. And you know, by working on this, you're saving money anyway, so it makes sense. Because municipal solid waste, if you look at the mixed fraction, that's the most expensive one to deal with. And of course, if you want to improve separate collection rate to reduce the amount of the mixed fraction, you'll have to pay for the improvements. You know, maybe you need more trucks or more bins or something. But overall, because the price of the landfilling, of the stabilization of waste, or even of incineration of this mixed waste is so high, separate collection makes economic sense any given time. And you look at the data from, I don't know, Catalonia, you get cleaner fraction out of it. So it's easier for recyclers to take. They will pay more, they will reject less of the waste. Same thing holds in Slovenia. So we have mandatory separate collection at the national level anyway, also of organics, of course, which I'm sure you've already spoken about. But zero waste makes economic sense because there's less waste, there's less mixed waste, which means less waste they have to pay for. Because, for example, packaging, the extended producer responsibility schemes will take care of that. And I don't know, for some waste streams, the waste manager can even sell them free on the market. So, I mean, sort of a no-brainer once you understand the concept, I would say. And the community was consulted when the strategy was prepared. We also have like a yearly meeting of a sort of zero waste board. Also, we are present to discuss progress and see what's good, what's not good, what's been working, what needs to be changed. And now because they're certified, they also will be audited every 3 years by an external auditor to make sure that, you know, when they claim that there's zero waste, that there's actually something measurable. There are numbers, there are weights, there's things to show, right? There are measures that they've been doing, and it's not just stuff that they've done 5 years ago, but in the last 3 years since the last revision. So it's not like, in a sense, that they can just claim to be zero waste. There are many mechanisms here, both at the national level and international level, to keep them in check. And they're happy to participate because they see the benefits. Also, zero waste itself is a tourism magnet. So, I mean, it just works out. I don't know. It's a win-win-win sort of situation. But yeah, maybe it's time for questions.
Thank you so much, Jaka. Actually, the win-win phrase we already heard from Jag, so I really like that you actually backed him up. Indeed, it is a win-win. Win for the environment, win for the community, and yay. There is, and thank you for your approach of saying how important communication is, that infrastructure without communication wouldn't work actually. So this is a very important message. Thank you for sharing it with us. There is a question in chat concerning the packaging. The first question is about well, the first half of the question is what is used in Slovenia to pack bread, baguettes, and different bakery stuff, and then what producers use to for the substitution, the food packaging for more sustainable one. Do they?
Okay, bread, I think it's mostly paper bags. Some do have these bullshit plastic windows, so you can use plastic window. And there's even a funded project at the Chemistry Institute on how to improve recycling of this bullshit. But yeah, I mean, it's like a waste of energy, basically, a normal paper bag. But yeah, I don't buy bread in the store because I can't eat it, so I'm not the best reference for that. But I think, yeah, it's mostly paper bags. As far as substitution, yes, there are several companies working on that. But the first thing that everyone tries, of course, is to reduce the weight of the packaging. So, they make the same sort of packaging, but it's thinner, or maybe it has holes, or, they try to remove as many elements as possible to reduce their plastic footprint that way, which can be problematic sometimes because then, I don't know, you take, for example, bottles. Some are so thin, you can crush them like a little bug. But you don't want them that way if you want a deposit return system where you want a bottle that can last several cycles just being washed, right? So as far as substitution, yeah, we see sometimes people change materials, either, I don't know, some things that we don't approve of, like some drinks going from glasses to plastic, or other things going from plastic to metal or to paper. Like, this is stuff of individual engagement, basically. It's not that we have any national or local ordinance that would say, oh yeah, we now ban all packaging made out of bones and you can only use stone, for example. Nothing like that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have any super specific, crazy nice examples for substitution that you would be wowed. But I don't know, we have not, because we even don't have a deposit return system implemented, for example. When it comes to reuse, we have one nice example would be a farmer that he's a dairy farmer. So he produces yogurts, cheese, various milks, that sort of stuff. And if you can imagine, it's much more complicated to transport that around because you have to maintain the cold, right, for the product not to go bad. And still he manages to have even an online shop and ensure reuse of the packaging because they have all these insulated boxes that you return, and it's all the usual return-based system. Basically, when you order the next time, you don't pay the deposit and you return, and it all works out. Or same for, I don't know, ice cream, but it's nothing really special. I think if you want examples for that, maybe Austria, Germany, even Benelux region, France have much more.
Thank you, Jaka. Thank you for your reply. Thank you for sharing. Dear friends, if there is no questions, I really want us to let Jaka go and thank him enormously for joining us during his vacation. Jaka, thank you for everything that you do for Slovenia, for Ukraine, and for environment. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good vacation.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Ciao.
Bye. Дорогі друзі, я вертаюся до української. Мені здається, у нас більше немає англомовної. Тому, можливо, я попрошу перекладачок вже також завершувати свою роботу. Дякуємо, що ви були з нами. Дякуємо вам, що ви є. Дякуємо вам, що ви були на попередніх подіях. Дякуємо, що ви були сьогодні. Ми знаємо, як непросто англійською мовою сприймати таку непросту інформацію, тому ми обов'язково надішлемо вам на електронні адреси презентацію Джека. Там також буде інформація і про Словенію. Дякуємо вам, що ви були з нами. І сподіваємося, що будемо з вами на зв'язку. Ви знаєте, де нас знайти. Ми є в соцмережах, у нас є сайт, у нас є наша електронна адреса. Будь ласка, пишіть, будьте на зв'язку і сподіваємося до скорих зустрічей. Дякуємо дуже вам. І гарного усім дня, і особливо спокійного усім дня.